Thank you for joining me today, and I want to welcome you to No Nonsense Nonprofits. Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. I wanted to talk to you about building an effective process for reviewing your finances, getting ready for audits, and getting that 990 completed. Many of us with fiscal year ends that ended in June are going through that process now. If you're a December year end, you may still be going through your audit process and getting that 990 done because if you're on extension, it's due in November. So let's get started. I really want to talk to you about designing the process that's going to help you get these things accomplished. And they're huge things to do. And so, like, audit readiness really takes all year long, but there's a checklist that we can go through and we can help that process along. The reason this is so important is it ensures the accuracy and accountability before you get to the audit process or before you're trying to file your 990. It reduces the risk of errors and therefore reduces the risk of any penalties or potentially the revoking of your tax exempt status for severe penalties. For example, if you don't file your 990 3 years in a row, you are automatically revoked, and that includes the 990N. If your 990 is late, there is a daily penalty. Now, remember, there is an automatic 6-month extension on the 990, so that really gives us 11 and a half months to get this done. So there really shouldn't be any real catastrophic reason for not filing that 990 with the extension. Getting these things done and having a process and following that process, that protects your nonprofit's organization. It keeps your reputation that you are in compliance, that you don't lose your status or you aren't on a probationary status. And it helps you stay in compliance with the required disclosures. For example, did your board review the 990 or not? That is one of the things on the 990, and it's on the checklist that I'm going to help you or show you today when we get through the steps here. So really what we want to do is we want to establish an internal framework. We want to define the scope of what we're going to do and who's responsible for it. Now, ultimately, this could be the responsibility of the finance or the audit committee, and they should be leading this effort. But we know that many times that'll get delegated to the management team, and they will provide oversight. So we want to assign clear roles for who's going to be preparing, who's going to be reviewing, and who's going to be approving the 990. So I've got a map for the workflow. We want to document our steps and we want to check off who's done what and when. We're going to typically do a walkthrough of typical transactions to identify gaps. Now, this is if you have an audit, this is what they call a walkthrough, but it's a good idea to do it yourself. So you want to take a transaction and walk through the process and look for gaps in your internal control. We want to take a risk-based approach to this. We want to focus on the high-risk areas that when we're doing our review. How do we recognize revenue? How have we allocated expenditures to grants? Who's approved those expenditures? So when we're doing this walkthrough and control testing, we're going to be looking for approvals. We're going to be looking at those general ledger entries, and we're going to be looking at the bank reconciliations. So you're just step by step, all the way through the process. Did we follow the process? Were there any gaps? Is there any areas of improvement? Another thing we want to do whenever we possibly can is leverage technology and documentation tools. So using our accounting system or our online document storage, we're going to be centralizing our document storage. We want to make sure that we have the correct version there. So sometimes worksheets get updated and updated. You want to have some sort of process for controlling what's the most current version and what supports the numbers in the accounting system. You want an audit trail of who changed what and when. So you really want to make sure your accounting process has that in there. And if you're using donor management systems or accounts payable processing systems, you want those audit trails in there as well. Access control to protect sensitive data. This is going to be obviously like your payroll data. Only certain people should have access to it. Once it hits the general ledger, it should probably not include names and various salary amounts. The timing and key elements of a review. I like to start the review once the year end is closed, but I would recommend definitely starting at least 4 to 12 weeks before your audit or your filing deadline. Again, these are big projects. Conduct an internal review before you go to your external audit. And if you don't have an external audit, still conduct that internal review. Make any final revisions and then file your 990. And don't forget that using Form 8868 will give you that automatic 6-month extension. And it is very common for organizations to use that 6-month extension, especially if you have an audit. So the key elements of the review that I would like you to do is look at your general ledger and make sure all your reconciliations are done. Make sure you have your supporting documents, your grant agreements, your board minutes, your conflict of interest statements, your governance policies, like your document retention policy, your gift acceptance policy, what's the policy for executive compensation and how is it approved? You want the board to be involved in what's going on the Form 990, and we have to report the board information on the Form 990. So how many average hours do board members work a week? What compensation are they receiving? Are they related to other people in the organization? We want to make sure we have that very accurately recorded on the 990. We want to make sure that our program versus admin ratios are accurate and we've allocated things out like we've talked about before. Overhead gets allocated on a reasonable basis, and that we have followed our compensation policies for the executive team and reported that on the 990. And then we move on to the board review. Once it's completed for the 990 and it's ready to submit, we want to schedule a board meeting and have the board or finance committee review that 990, document the process of who reviewed it, when, what changes were made as a result of that review. And remember that this step is required to be spelled out on the 990. It's a good idea to have that documentation in the minutes or things so that you can easily take the information from the minutes of that meeting and move it over to the 990, what the process is. Once we file the 990, we're not done. Once everything's posted, everything's filed, then we're going to look at following up on some of the recommendations that we developed through this process. How can we improve our process such that it moves smoothly? Do we need to start earlier? Did we skip a step? Or do we not need a certain step? Those kinds of things. We want to communicate those improvements to our staff and our board and really just create a culture of transparency and readiness around this review process. So we took these steps and we put them into ChatGPT, and it came up with this checklist. And I hope you can see this here. It's just a very basic checklist, but it's a nice short 2-pager. We have put the link to this checklist in the description of this for Facebook Live, but if you're not on Facebook Live, just send us a comment. We can send you the link to the checklist. It's a great link. This is the internal review checklist for audit and 990 compliance and completion. It's great in that it divides it up into various sections, and each section has a few steps that need to be completed, who it was assigned to, what the due date is, status, and notes. So completed or any notes that you want to, and this is where you can put your notes for anything that you need. But you can see planning and preparation, assigning who's responsible for what, set an internal review deadline, again, 4 to 12 weeks before the 990s due. Confirm the 990 deadline and extension if you need it. So make sure that you could probably attach the extension to this. Make notes about whether the extension was done or not. Grab your documents from last year and grab all of your organizational policies. So that's planning and prep. Financial review. This is your going through all of your year-end, just confirming those balances on the statement of financial position, looking at those expense allocations as revenue posted in accordance with GAAP. Have you reconciled your contribution revenue to your donor database? Those kinds of things you could add or subtract to this section right here. Document your internal controls. Do that walkthrough yourself. Test the control points. Review access rights. Ensure documentation is stored securely and accessibly. And review your policies like whistleblower, document retention, conflict of interest. This section refers specifically to the 990. Get the draft of the 990, whether you're preparing it internally or you've got a CPA who's done multiple 990s, you're having them do that. Either way, just get the draft completed, review the compensation disclosures, look at your public charities test if you're a 501c3, and confirm that all your governance questions are answered correctly, because sometimes those change from year to year. Then schedule your board or committee review. Get that on their agenda. Distribute the draft to them. Document any feedback that you have and put that in the minutes of your meeting. And then finalizing and filing, you're going to implement those changes. You're going to finalize the 990. You're going to actually file the return. And then you're going to keep copies for your records retention. You're going to have a file copy for your record retention. You're also going to have a public disclosure copy. For example, if you have a Schedule B, that is not part of your public disclosure file. And then finally, the review. What internal documentation processes need to be updated? How do our process need to be updated? Is it just the documentation or the process itself? Assign responsibility for implementing those improvements, update the policies, and schedule next year's internal chart early. I thought that was really cool that we could create a simple document like that's very helpful for our organization in just a few minutes from ChatGPT. So I encourage you to download this chart. It is PDF, but easily convertible to Excel or use it in your workflow process. If you need a copy and can't get it through No Nonsense Nonprofits, let us know in the comments. We'll send you a link. Schedule your audit or finance committee's review if you haven't done that already. Give yourself a deadline. That way you'll make sure you get things done. Back up that way, basic project management kind of things to do. And consider adopting or upgrading tools for documentation and your audit trail management. So if you don't have audit trails in some of the applications you're using, how can you document that things were done? I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope this was helpful for you. If you have questions on this or any other topics, please put that in the comment section below. Of course, we always appreciate your likes. And remember, creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. If you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit organization, we'd love to help you cut through the noise.